Okay. These are just calculator problems. And again, they shouldn't be too hard, but the calculators are different how you use them. The one thing that's different that you probably haven't done before is this right there. All it is this is two problems in one. It means you've got to take 8 and then add 3 square roots of 6 divided by -1. That'll give you one answer. And then you take 8 and you subtract 3 square roots of 6 divided by -1 to get your second answer. Because these will have two answers. So, depending on the calculator you use, you need to know the order of operations. So, if you do this one, you got to type in 8 plus 3, and then you can just put the square root sign. And remember, that's a second function. It's yellow there. And then put 6. Now, what you need to do is this whole thing is over the -1, right? So before you press divided by -1, you got to press equals to figure out what this is. And then divide by -1. And you get -15.35, round to the nearest hundredth. Okay, so if you didn't press equals after you did this, all it would do is it would divide these by this by -1, not that part. When you're using this calculator, you would type it in 8 minus 3 times. When you put the square roots in here, remember you got to put the number first and then hit the square root sign. And then again, you got to press equals to figure out what that is, and then divided by -1, and you get -0.65.
That's all we have to do.
That's it, yep. So this one is 6 plus 4 square roots of 5.
That's my number.
And then again, remember, press equals after you type that in, and then divide by 7. So 21.35 is one answer. And then 6 minus 4 square roots of 5. Press equals, and then divide by 7. -0.42. Okay?
Did you say that?
-3 plus 0.2 times the square root of 7. Press equals and then divide by 4. You'd get -0.62. And then -3 minus 0.2.
I'm serious. I'm serious. I'm done.
Divided by 4 is -0.88. Now, a lot of 8th graders didn't know this. I'm assuming you guys all do. But just to make sure, when you put a negative number in here, do you guys all know you don't press the minus sign?
Yes.
Okay. On these, you got to put the number in first and then make it negative, right there. This one, you put it in the order that it says. Hit the negative, then the number. Okay? So, just to move it ahead a little bit, just so you kind of understand why they're giving you a problem like this. Eventually, we're going to be using what's called the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula is this: -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So what you got to do is you got to plug numbers in for a, b, and c. So that's why they're kind of, yesterday we just did this part. Now you're kind of getting used to doing this on a calculator, and then eventually this is what's used to solve quadratic formulas. It's real easy once you use it. Okay, then we got a couple of equations. So, solving equations, you use the rules as solving other equations. You get the letter by itself. So what do we gotta do to get the x by itself? The only thing wrong with it, it's got a square on it. Square root it. When you square root a square, it cancels. So whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. 7. Now on these, when you're solving these, you'll always get two answers. So it's plus and minus 7. Here you divide by 3. Is 64. And then you square root it. Plus or minus 8.
Is it always going to be 2?
Yes. Anytime you got an equation with a squared in it, there's always going to be two solutions or no solution. If it, if it turns out to be a negative square root. Here you divide by 7. And remember, you can have 0 on top, you can't on the bottom. So 0 divided by 7 is 0. So when you square root it, square root of 0 is 0. So, these are just like regular equations. You got to get the letter by itself. So the first thing you get rid of, you always do your add, remember you do PEMDAS backwards? So you do add and subtract first, then multiply and divide, then exponents. So to get rid of a 6, you subtract 6. So it's negative 3x squared equals 21. Then you divide by negative 3. So you get negative 7. Square root it, and what's going to happen?
No solution.
It's a negative, so you're getting an error on your calculator. So that one's a no solution, which means there's no number you could plug in there to make this work. These do have solutions. Here, to get the b by itself, get rid of the minus 16, so you add 16. Then divide by 8. B squared equals 5. And then square root. The square root of 5, if we round to the nearest hundredth, is 2.24. This one, minus 9. Divide by 3. And then square root, and you get plus or minus 5. I forgot. It's easy to forget. These, if there is a solution and it's a squared, you always got two answers. So make sure you put that. The reason why is this. If this were a graph, which again, you'll see this better when we graph. Well, I'll do this one's easier. If we graph this equation, it's going to be, since it's a quadratic, it's going to be a parabola. I missed my marks, but it's going to cross at positive 5 and at negative 5. So if you saw the graph, you can see the two solutions, but if you solve it normally, you'll only come up with one, so that's why you got to remember it could also be negative 5.